Hello and welcome to Factorio Space Age. This has been a long time coming. I'll just quickly mention my settings before we start the run, being a rail world because I don't want to get rid of biters, but there's not really anything new with them, and then we can get right into this. So, Factorio Space Age, what's that all about? Those of you familiar with Factorio will know that the final goal is to launch a rocket into space, but in Factorio Space Age, that is only the first step in a long line of tasks to finish the game, including exploring new planets, unlocking new technologies, and creating monumental space platforms to travel the vastness of space. That's a lot to think about, and we will explore all of it in more detail going forward, but my main goal for this first episode is to set up my factory on the starting planet Nauvis, do all the research I can, and get a working space platform going, which we can use to explore the star system. You'll have to excuse me if I'm a bit brief early on here, as there is a lot to cover, and Nauvis is largely the same as it is in vanilla. One of the first new changes we encounter, however, is the new fluid system. Now, rather than fluids spreading through pipes at a decreasing rate over distance, the entire connected fluid system is instead one giant unit, so fluid travels instantaneously from producer to consumer. Realism-wise, this is obviously a massive step back, but from a gameplay point of view, it overcomes a lot of the jankiness of the old fluid system, so I quite like it. Also, when hovering over part of a network of pipes, the entire network is highlighted, which is quite a cool visual. Once we have power set up, we can start researching, and another change made is that we now have to research some things we didn't need to before, such as electric miners, repair packs, and radars. I'm sort of ambivalent about this change. It makes sense, but just seems unnecessary to change how it worked before, where you started with them unlocked. The first research we really make use of is military, as there's a biter nest to the southeast that our pollution cloud is very quickly encroaching on, and on a rail world where biters don't expand, the best defense is a good offense. Unfortunately, it seems that the key to eat fish has changed with this update, and I very nearly died trying to figure out what it changed to in the middle of a fight. Even more surprisingly, fish now rot if you keep them for more than 2 hours, so I'll have to keep an eye on that before I go into a fight. The new graphics for destroyed nests look interesting, like a portal into the goo dimension. I get some intermediates hand automated and slowly start cracking on with research. The offset on the science packs in the labs is really yucky, although this is pre-release footage, so hopefully by the time Space Age fully releases, it'll be fixed. My next step is to plan out where my smelting stacks will go. I plan out quite a lot of production, as it's my intention for this starter base to last me until I've explored some new planets and can use the technologies I discover to build the real base. Once I've got some furnaces set up, I immediately start crafting the basic intermediates so that I can get a sort of mini-mall on the go. I've started to prefer these sort of mall before science bases recently, as having access to all these buildings lets you expand the factory faster, which results in more science down the line anyway. With this being recorded before release, I also don't have access to the Afraid of the Dark mod, which I use to keep everything bright enough for YouTube, so I need to actually bother automating lamps. Doesn't mean I'll always remember to use them, unfortunately. Another new mechanic I'm making use of is the circuit changes. You can use red and green wires now without any research, and you're able to read the contents of an entire connected belt by attaching a wire to just one. All of these changes make it really easy to make an early game sushi setup for the labs, where you use this sort of rotating belt to pass the packs around the labs, and only add science packs to it if there's less than a set threshold of them. Which is beneficial because it makes it really easy to add new science packs, and there's going to be a lot of new science packs in this run. When adding green science, you can see that it's as simple as running the belt up to the sushi loop, and then setting the conditions for when more green science can be added. As I said, a lot of this base is going to feel vanilla, so I'm skipping a lot of individual steps, such as the setting up of this steel stack. It's not long before I get military science on the go, as biter nests' health now scale with evolution, so I will need to stay on top of my damage output. I'm aiming for 30 science per minute with all the packs going forward, as I'm trying to be realistic about what this base will be able to support, and need some resources left over for launching rockets. At this point I need to get oil before I can progress any further, so I start to lay down a railroad to the nearest oil patch. With the new rail system introduced in Factorio 2.0, rails can now be rotated in 16 directions rather than 8, making paths like this much smoother. I'd be lying though if I said it didn't look a bit cursed after being so used to the old system. With oil being shipped to the base, I start off by producing a full belt of sulphur, then some explosives for rockets, which strangely don't require green circuits anymore. And finally, a full belt of plastic, which I forgot to set the recipe in half the plants for. These rockets make it significantly easier to fight biters, although it's glaringly obvious that we're going to need to invest some research in explosive damage and shooting speed. Having dipped our toes in some chemistry, chemical science is now available to us, which means a few things, most surprisingly of which, for those only familiar with the vanilla game, we can now research rockets. Not the shooty kind, the space kind. More on that soon. First of all, with blue science we can unlock advanced oil processing, and therefore lubricant, a vital ingredient in the production of robot frames. I obviously get straight into producing those, as only 2 or 3 hours into the run, I'm already sick to death of placing everything by hand. I've produced both types of bots because I'll eventually want logistics bots too, so I might as well stock up early. My first use for our newly unleashed bot friends is to print down a second copper stack, as I'll need a lot of copper if I'm going to start launching rockets. These new blueprint graphics are quite nice, as not only do they stand out much better, but also if you look closely, you can see it changes colour when a bot is assigned to place it. The first rocket component I unlock is rocket fuel, which is the simplest of the 3, considering it literally just needs light oil. The introduction of roboparts into the base has grabbed my shitty power plant by the ankles and swung it against every surface in the vicinity, so I bring some sulfuric acid over to the south here, planning to go mine uranium and set up nuclear power. The only thing stopping me from setting up a nuclear plant right here, right now, was that this was literally my first day playing the DLC, and I wanted to get to space before I finished playing for the day. To that end, I bring copper and iron over, as well as sponging off that sulfuric acid line to make the second ingredient in rockets, blue circuits. That's right, rocket control units have been lost eternally to the void, which I won't pretend I'm not a bit happy about. The final ingredient is still LDS, however, and with that, all we have to do is wait for the research to finish for the silo itself. With the silo placed, it's time to talk about the new rocket costs. Each rocket now only needs 50 rocket parts, and each rocket part only costs a single of each ingredient. You heard that right, rockets are now 20 times cheaper than they were before. The silo can also store up to 2 of them at once, meaning you can send the buggers one after the other without even closing the doors if you have enough materials and production speed to do so. I realised I had committed the ultimate sin and made rockets without productivity modules, so I handcrafted some modules to put into it. I then handcrafted a space platform starter whilst I waited for the rocket. No points guessing what that does. And when the crafting finishes, I placed it into the rocket and sent it off into space. The name it gave me automatically was Satan, and I just decided to keep that. Look at little Satan, so peacefully floating in Nauvisa's orbit. These space platforms are the bread and butter of space age, and despite their great potential, we are going to use this one for a simple purpose: space science. Before we can start producing science, we need to send some buildings up to the platform, which means more rockets. Each rocket has a weight limit of 1 ton, so we're limited in how much we can send up at a time. For instance, a belt is 10 kilograms, so we can send up 100 belts on a rocket. Or an inserter is 20 kilograms, so we can send up 50 at a time on a rocket. About half a dozen rockets later, I've got everything I need on the platform and can start producing science. It starts by using these asteroid collectors to pick up asteroid fragments, which drift in space around the platform. There are 3 types of asteroid which we can break down in a crusher into an important material. Metallic asteroids give us iron, carbon asteroids give us carbon, and oxide asteroids give us ice. Coincidentally, ice, carbon and iron plates are exactly what we need for space science. I can't help but feel like this is far too easy for space science, so I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up changing this before release to be a bit more complicated, but I'm not one to look a gift horse in the mouth. The asteroid collectors don't give us asteroids in the exact ratios we want for science, so to stop it backing up, I have these inserters which just throw away any we have too many of back into space. Back on Nalvis, I built this landing pad, from which we can receive the science packs from the platform. You can only have 1 landing pad per planet, so all items you drop from orbit fall to the exact same landing pad. Fortunately, since we're only importing space science right now, this isn't quite a problem yet. The power situation didn't solve itself, so I built a uranium mine out east with the intention of finishing my nuclear plans from earlier. I can then bring back the ore to be centrifuged into uranium-238 and the cherished uranium-235. Clearly feeling a bit keen, I go print down a massive iron mine, ready to be turned on as soon as nuclear power has been researched. I quickly blasted through all the materials I brought, so I'll have to come back later once the mall is restocked. Checking up on Saturn, I realised that the inserter that was meant to throw out extra iron asteroid chunks was accidentally set to check for small iron asteroids, so it wasn't producing science. Once I fixed the condition, the offending items walk the plank. After a bit of a wait, I get the iron mine near enough finished, and I'm ready with some assemblers to craft heat exchangers, turbines and heat pipes as soon as the nuclear power research finishes. The eagle-eyed among you will also realise that I'm researching logistics system, because in Space Age, it now only needs red, green, blue and space science to research. It makes sense to be fair, because you don't need yellow science to go to the other planets, but you kind of need robot logistics to make the most of silos and landing pads. I need the power like right now, even if I don't have the resources yet to build a second reactor, so I decide to live with just 1 for now. With the new circuit options with reactors, we can make a simple 100% efficient reactor by only inserting fuel if the temperature's below like 700 degrees and there's no fuel already in the reactor. The new combinator UI, which you can see here, is really good, I think. It's not long then before I get that second reactor crafted, and we have the sweet smell of 160 megawatts of low maintenance power flowing through our base. Even better is when logistics system finishes researching and we can start a robot mall. My joy is short-lived when it reveals truly how short my base is on circuits, so I need to go fix that before I go wild. This is quickly remedied with this new circuit setup up to the northwest, the output of which I turn into some efficiency modules for the mines, as well as making available to the logistics network. The efficiency modules are more for the pollution reduction rather than power, as I don't want to spend hours clearing biters. With circuits sorted for now, I can expand them all a bit more. I stick a blue circuit build onto the circuit area, and with the robot frames from earlier, we're already 2/3 of the way to yellow science. Then, with all the ingredients for LDS basically right there, we can just set that up and bing bang bosh, that's yellow science. I set up a big new copper mine to keep up with all the new demand we're causing, and then I can spend all that new production on purple science. Just don't look at my electric furnace production. It's an illusion. You're all suffering from mass hysteria. Anyway, look at this cool thing. Since fusion power is actually a thing later on in the game, the portable fusion reactor has been kicked right down near the end of the tech tree, and has been replaced in the early game by the portable fission reactor. Don't question how the engineer can carry one of these things, and definitely don't mention his extra limbs and lumpy back. But for the low cost of a drastically shortened life expectancy, we can get a free 750 kilowatts of power forever. So, we have all 7 sciences you can make on Nalvis, we have some really nice power armour with enough energy to last it forever, and we have a robot mall. Where do we go now? The answer is simple. Space. Deeper space. I'll talk about all the potential destinations in a moment, but no matter our choice, the first step in this journey is to launch a new space platform, which I will now name Toyota Corolla. The three options for a destination are Vulcanus, a volcanic hellhole of a planet which holds the secrets of metalworking; Fulgora, a barren desert world holding the remains of an ancient alien civilization we can research to discover the secrets of electromagnetism; and Gleba, a planet oozing at the seams with life, where we can discover the secrets of agriculture. I quite like the sound of improved metalworking right now, so I decided to visit Vulcanus first, although I will have to visit all three before I can finish the game. To visit another planet, we're going to need to forge Toyota Corolla into a solid and well-protected ship, capable of traversing the bullet hell of asteroids crisscrossing through interplanetary space. I didn't mention it before, but now that I'm building at scale, it's worth noting how much space platforms cost. Every tile of platform takes 20 steel and 20 copper wire, which is pretty expensive but reasonable considering that it's literally a spacefaring vessel. The expense really comes in the weight that the tiles add, as the heavier the platform is, the slower it will travel, and given how dangerous interplanetary space is, you do not want to be out there for long. As far as the actual traversal of space goes, asteroids give us all the resources we need to fuel our platform, as well as craft ammo to destroy incoming asteroids. The larger asteroids we destroy break down into fragments, which our asteroid collectors can collect, that are then crushed into iron, carbon and ice, like I spoke about earlier. We can melt the ice into water, and then iron and water make oxidizer, and carbon and water make fuel, which we then combine together in a thruster to make thrust to propel us to other planets. Some of the iron also gets made into ammo to destroy more asteroids, of course, because it turns out that being hit by a multi-ton chunk of space debris is not good for Toyota Corolla. My first prototype ends up looking like this, which would have worked great if it wasn't for the fact you can't place underground pipes across the vacuum of space. Super obvious in hindsight, but I never once claimed to be smart. Okay, so I end up with this instead. A bit bigger, but at least it functions, and I think it's about time we send her out for a test drive. Space platforms work just like trains. You tell them where to stop at, give them the conditions at each stop and when to move on to the next, and then just let it rip. Since this isn't quite automatic yet, I just set Vulcanus as the destination and press the play button. Yeah, it became pretty apparent about halfway there that she wasn't nearly keeping up enough ammo production to reach Vulcanus unscathed, so I turn around and try to get back to Nalvis. Soon enough, an asteroid slips through past the starved gun turrets, then even more, and by now I'm starting to question whether I'll ever see beloved Toyota Corolla again. Taking damage to the platform is bad, but if that command centre building I stupidly placed very near the front gets destroyed, then we lose the whole thing. It looks like a whole thruster got taken out while I wasn't looking. This definitely looks very bad, but we're getting closer to Nalvis now. Thankfully, she gracefully pulls into orbit of Nalvis, and not a second too late, as we were starting to run out of spare buildings to repair the platform with. Okay, so what went wrong there? The answer is pretty simple. Our iron production was just woefully insufficient, both due to just pure production numbers, as well as small brownouts from all these machines fighting over the measly few solar panels. Even with the 4 times power boost the solar panels get in space. My solution is simply to put some speed modules in the furnaces and ignore the power problem for some stupid fucking reason. Predictably, our ammo is still insufficient, but I do have the sense to notice this time and turn around before it gets too bad. If you noticed, I forgot to delete Vulcanus from the schedule, which means as soon as I reach Norvis, the platform sets straight back off into space, which could have ended up being disastrous if I hadn't noticed. Iteration 3 of Toyota Corolla looks like this. I've doubled up the furnaces and moved the solar panels to the back, as well as adding a few more. It's not really enough solar panels to prevent all of the brownouts, but hopefully the extra production can tank the waxing and waning of the grid. And you know what? It works really well. I reach about 2/3 of the way to Vulcanus before deciding to turn around, because it's touch and go on whether I'll get there unscathed. I have no doubts it would reach, but if it gets there too damaged to return, then it'll be stuck there until I can establish myself on Vulcanus and send up repair materials, as well as having to build a whole new platform now. The return is far from graceful, as we've travelled far further by now than it would on a normal one-way trip. I had some idea in my head that the faster we go, the harder it would be to survive, so you can see I disconnected the right thruster to slow us down, although it's hard to quantify to what extent it made the trip easier or harder. She does eventually limp back into Nalvi's orbit, but this is the most banged up I've ever seen Toyota Corolla. This time it was pretty blatant that the power problem and the ammo crafting were the issue. Despite the extra furnaces, the bottleneck had just wiggled downstream to the ammo assembler, and the power fluctuations were exasperating the issue even more, so I add even more solar panels and upgrade the ammo assembler to tier 3 with 4-speed modules. Out in interplanetary space, the difference from this small change is immediately noticeable, and it seems that as long as we let the iron buffers in the furnaces build up before departing, we should be able to reach our destination no problem. I try to sneak a glimpse at the surface of Vulcanus from orbit, but all we see is pitch black and the gently rising volcanic gases, so it looks like the next step is going to be a manned expedition. Next time. Hello and welcome back to Factorio Space Age. Having completed construction of our space platform Toyota Corolla in the last episode, today we will be heading to the planet Vulcanus in pursuit of the secrets of metalworking. You've caught me in the middle of loading up Toyota Corolla with the essentials we're going to need on Vulcanus, which is as easy as setting up logistic requests in the platform, and our robots will automatically deliver the items to the rocket silo to be launched. If you're wondering about the 1,000 red ammo I'm loading up to take with us, all's going to be revealed in time. As you can see here, since the last episode, the rocket texture has been updated to include this little second stage at the top, which looks great and gives the rocket a very unique vibe compared to vanilla. Once Toyota Corolla is fully loaded, all it's missing is us. To head to space, we first need to empty our entire inventory and ammo slots so that we can't cheat the weight limit system, and then we can climb into the rocket for liftoff. I'll just let you enjoy this. Whilst we travel to Vulcanus, I'm just going to quickly address something I'm sure you already noticed. For the first hour of recording here, I wasn't getting any audio from the game for some reason. I fixed it a bit later, which is probably only a few minutes for you, but I apologise for the relative silence for now. Upon arrival, all I've got left to do is disembark, and we descend through the thick, smoky atmosphere. I waste no time sending down my resources, starting with a landing pad and some solar panels. Once I have the landing pad placed, I can utilise the logistics groups added in Factorio 2.0 to copy exactly what I had requested to Toyota Corolla, meaning that it will start to send everything down automatically. I take the time whilst the packages arrive to explore a bit. To the south and west is a mountainous area with some sulfuric acid geysers. To the north is a lava basin, and to the east we have some ashy flatlands with a large coal patch. My first action is to start mining the rocks on the surface, as they not only contain iron and copper ore, but also trace amounts of the elusive tungsten, which is actually what we're here on this planet for. Tungsten is a tough but useful material only found on Vulcanus, but we do have some obstacles to overcome before we can find and mine a proper patch of the stuff. So for now, we only have what we can get out of these rocks. I need something to do with this iron and copper ore, so I start mining coal and set up these little smelting stacks I can just dump it into. I realised now that I had forgotten to bring pump jacks, so I have to place down some furnaces to smelt some steel. I went exploring whilst I waited for it to smelt and found a tungsten patch to the northwest, but our pathetic little mining drills can't even touch the stuff, so I'll need to come back later. Anyway, once I've crafted some pump jacks, I can head over to the sulphur geysers to extract sulphuric acid directly out of the ground. I can combine tungsten ore, carbon and sulphuric acid to create tungsten carbide, a super hard material used in this planet's science pack, as well as the new buildings we can craft here. All the trees on the planet are absolutely charred, so I can mine them for carbon, although there is a recipe to craft it which I'll use later, basically just combining coal and sulphuric acid. The final resource I haven't mentioned is calcite, which is used in a lot of chemical processes. It's usually found in these mountainous areas, which makes it a pain in the arse to transport, as we don't have cliff explosives unlocked yet. They've been bumped back to be researched by this planet's science pack. Combining 1,000 sulphuric acid with calcite makes 10,000 steam, which as far as Vulcanus goes, is probably our best way to make power. Unfortunately, we brought steam engines when this steam is actually way too hot for them to use efficiently, so I need to handcraft some turbines and place them instead. By this point I have way too much stone in my inventory from mining rocks, so I place this chest by the lava with an inserter, and can just toss anything I don't want right in to be incinerated. Next up, we can combine sulphuric acid, calcite and coal to make heavy oil. This is a pretty crappy recipe, but it's only meant to be temporary as we unlock proper coal liquefaction using this planet's science pack. For now, I'm just making lubricant, as there is one very specific building I want, the foundry. It's a pain to craft, needing lubricant, tungsten carbide, steel, green circuits, and reinforced concrete, but it pays off with a crafting speed of 4, a built-in 50% productivity boost, meaning we basically get a free item for every 2 we craft, and most importantly, it can make infinite iron and copper if we pump lava into it. Just watch it go. Every new building added in Space Age looks amazing, but this one might be my favourite. The most powerful part of the foundry, however, is its improved recipes. Each iron ore turns into 15 molten iron, and then 30 molten iron turns into 1.5 steel, meaning that you can turn iron ore into steel in a 4:3 ratio, as opposed to the 5:1 ratio in vanilla. This doesn't matter so much here on Vulcanus, as we get iron and copper for free from lava, but using foundries on other planets will make the most of this. The only real cost is that some foundry recipes require calcite, specifically the ones where you're actually making the molten iron or copper. So anywhere that utilises foundries needs to have calcite shipped to it from here. Before we can really progress any further now, we need to liberate a tungsten patch, and as you can see, I'm preparing for quite a fight. Vulcanus is home to a particularly nasty and viciously territorial species of giant worm known as demolishers, and let's just say this patch is square in this one's territory. As you can see from the achievement, the mere act of building here has attracted its attention. All we need to do now is wait. It's not long before the thing barrels in from the northeast, and for a creature of its size it can't half travel. It takes hundreds of magazines of red ammo to take the thing down, and this is only a small one. I dread to think what the larger of its species look like. The corpse yields a lot of tungsten, and this weird smoke which seems to interfere with my flying robots. But we can now see on the map that the red highlights marking its territory have disappeared, meaning that this area is now ours to exploit. With tungsten being an exceptionally tough ore, we need an exceptionally tough drill, which is where the big mining drill comes in. Its tungsten carbide tip allows it to unearth even the toughest of minerals, and exceptional precision means that it depletes patches only half the time that it produces ore, as well as mining 5 times as fast. The only problem is that it needs red circuits, which I didn't have the space, nor the patience, to set up yet, so I ended up sending it from Nalvis in Toyota Corolla, along with enough LDS, rocket fuel and blue circuits to launch 2 rockets back to Nalvis with science. Before I place my first drills on a tungsten patch, it's probably worth mentioning checkpoint technologies. A checkpoint technology is a new feature in Factorio 2.0, which is basically a research where instead of consuming a certain amount of science packs, you instead have to complete a task. For instance, when I crafted my first big mining drill, it finished the research for tungsten steel, and then if I craft tungsten steel, it'll unlock this planet's science pack, the metallurgic science pack. Checkpoint technologies are quite useful because they've sort of guided me through setting up on Vulcanus without overwhelming me with information and too many options. I started producing tungsten steel on the left over here, and the moment the first one crafted and I unlocked the metallurgic science pack, I immediately started crafting that in this foundry. The metallurgic science pack unlocks a few really good technologies. Cliff explosives, which have been sorely missed. Tier 4 belts, which will be immensely useful going forward. Coal liquefaction, which will boost our oil production massively on this planet. And finally, a new asteroid reprocessing recipe, which, I might find a use for, maybe. I head over to a tungsten patch to further expand our mining operations when I see this big lumbering bastard in the distance. This shows how aggressively territorial the demolishers are. We're mining only 100 metres away from it, but because we're just outside of its territory, it couldn't care less. I had a second foundry crafting the metallurgic science pack, and thanks to the crafting speed and productivity, this is probably all the production we're going to need to last us a long time, if not the rest of the game. That doesn't mean we're done here on Vulcanus, however. Expanding production means expanding power, so I finally get around to automating turbines and tacking them on to the end of the power plant. My first use of this power is industrial amounts of molten iron directly on the shore of the lava lakes, as this simplifies getting the lava and dumping the stone. We're going to use all this molten iron to make all 4 tiers of transport belts for almost free, which we can then ship all over the star system to wherever wants them. I only get up to tier 2 for now, as we haven't even unlocked tier 4, and we need to get red circuits automated before we bother with tier 3. I also get red ammo automated, because we aren't done with our demolisher conquest quite yet. Whilst we were working, the first 1000 metallurgic science packs crafted, which just happens to be the number which we can launch on one rocket, so I get them sent off to Toyota Corolla to be shipped back to Nalvis. I had the bots remotely set up for delivery of the packs to the labs, so once Toyota Corolla has dropped them off, we can immediately begin researching cliff explosives. Once they finish researching, you can see we get a nice little achievement, and I begin working on a mall which will include producing them. The recipe is basically the same as vanilla, just with 10 calcite added on, which means I'm going to need to set up explosives before I can make any. That's pretty simple, as we already have most of the chemicals we need, but it is quite funny that we're mining sulfuric acid to turn it into oil, to turn it into petroleum, just to turn it back into sulfur. Whilst some of that's crafting, I noticed my radars have discovered a few large tungsten patches to the northeast in another worm's territory, so it looks like we have a lava worm on the menu tonight. I get a bit panicky when it destroys some turrets with its eruption attacks, but once it gets into the range of the majority of the turrets, it gets taken down pretty quickly. It's interesting that its body is made up of so much tungsten. Almost makes me wonder if they accumulate trace tungsten on the surface as they move, and if these tungsten patches we're finding are the curled up remains of giant demolishers. When I return, a few cliff explosives have crafted, so we have the ability to destroy any cliffs in our way, but for the moment my attention is on this big open space. I start spitballing a green circuit build utilising metal casting, as we can turn molten copper directly into copper cable. This is a bit off ratio, as the iron foundry can only really support 2 and a bit green circuit assemblers, but once I get the circuits flowing, I'll be able to craft speed modules to make up the difference. I provide the molten iron and copper from this new little build, and the build itself is easily tileable, so I can expand it as much as my demand requires. The next resource I need is plastic for red circuits, so I'm upgrading my oil setup by changing over to that new coal liquefaction recipe I unlocked. The coal for the plastic we're mining using big mining drills to make the most of the lower resource consumption, and with plastic producing we can start looking at the red circuit setup. Every foundry produces enough copper cable to feed an astounding 24 red circuit assemblers, so we can get away with just 2 of them. I then start copying the setup right down the stack, forgetting to add a power pole on the right there. After I've fixed it and routed in the plastic and green circuits, we've got red circuits going. This has, however, revealed that we have a crippling shortage of sulfuric acid, as the power and water demand from this new setup is slurping up that tiny patch we landed near. The nearest one I've found is just to the southwest of my calcite patch, halfway into another demolisher territory, so we have no choice but to take on another fight. I find a nice open area to place down my turrets, and it's not long before the great bastard slithers in, searching for our intrusion. Thankfully, it's just another small demolisher, so we quite easily deal with it. Anyone who's watched my videos before will know that my absolute favourite activity in the world is connecting up pump jacks onto oil patches. And the joy's all the same with these sulfuric acid patches, so you can fucking bet I was chuffed. Since we were needing so much water, I go completely overkill on the steam production, since our only method of producing water is condensing the steam, and it's a 10:1 steam to water ratio. Once I've built the new power plant and demolished the old one, I can then put down a new larger oil build, as the old one was barely keeping up even after we upgraded it. The ability to mirror buildings added in 2.0 makes cracking setups much more visually satisfying. The reason I built the oil production all the way down here is that it needs to sponge both steam for the coal liquefaction and water for cracking from the power plant. Now that our bottlenecks are solved, I can get back to circuits. Blue circuits are pretty simple, with sulfuric acid being an elemental resource on this planet, and they're the final ingredient I needed for the 4th tier of belts. So after quickly connecting a new tungsten mine, and then turning it into a bunch of tungsteel, we can finally get turbo belts, which can shift a whopping 60 items per second. Right, so we've got all these cool buildings now, but they're kind of stuck here, since we haven't got rockets automated. So I get around to setting up rocket fuel, which is obviously just the same as it was on Nalvis. Things get interesting with LDS, however, as we can now cast it directly from molten metals and take advantage of the productivity bonus. This means it only takes 4 buildings to make 1 LDS per second, which is pretty crazy without modules. And that's rockets. If we really wanted to leave now, we could. But we aren't done here. Not nearly. My goal right now is to consume 1 of each rocket ingredient a second, which, with these tier 2 productivity modules, translates to about 1 rocket every 40 seconds. I start to place beacons around the silo, but quickly realise that with only tier 1 speed modules, I'm still falling just short of the target, so I start researching tier 2s. Whilst they research and craft, I get on the lookout for a new coal patch, as I need one big enough to sustain oil production for a long time whilst I'm off on other planets, and I settle on this 11 million coal patch to the north in another worm territory. But once I get there and I'm searching for the demolisher, I start to get concerned that I'm far enough away from spawn for this to be a medium demolisher, which I'm terribly ill-equipped to deal with. At this point, if it was a medium, my only choices would be to either just give up on the coal patch, or have to import uranium from Northeast and nuke the thing, although I would have to wait a while for the research to complete. I found this medium demolisher eventually, and my heart dropped, but after a moment I realised it was in the neighbouring territory to the north, so the search continues. I do eventually find it right down to the south, and thankfully it is a small one, so I set up my turrets on this coal patch and prepare for a fight. We make pretty short work of it like usual. Before we tap this coal patch, I first head back and set up refined concrete production. You see, We need lots of refined concrete for the new elevated rails introduced with Space Age, and we need elevated rails to cross these lava flats, because trying to route a normal rail through it sounds like some sort of esoteric form of torture. Since we obviously can't walk across the lava, the easiest way to build this is to actually get on the train and just place it as we go. Since we're using big mining drills, the mine itself is quite sparse, but in reality probably produces just as much as if we covered every inch possible in normal mining drills. My next step in preparing to leave is improving my calcite mine. We don't really use much calcite at all, so it's probably going to last a long time anyway, but changing it from regular to big drills will more than double that very long time. Although I love Toyota Corolla, and it will continue to serve as a supply ship for Vulcanus, we need to put something better together if we want to visit our next planet, Fulgora. For this reason, I've started automating all the buildings we'll need to construct the platform. I get a space platform starter sent into space and christen it Robin Reliant. I am a fucking idiot. For those not familiar with this three-wheeled masterpiece of British engineering, this is the equivalent of calling the Vulcanus ship Corolla Toyota. It's Reliant Robin, but that doesn't get fixed until next episode. The first improvement I want to make over Toyota Corolla is the cargo size. You might have noticed the 2 cargo bays I had attached to Toyota Corolla's hub, which increased the storage size by 20 each. Well, on Reliant Robin, I want 14 of them. This ship is going to do laps through the inner star system and go to all 4 inner planets, so it needs the cargo capacity to make that work. The power situation at Fulgora specifically is very bad, with solar panels in space only having 20% more production than normal. So to account for this, I'm going to need to make use of a mechanic I haven't really used up to this point: quality. Quality is an additional stat which has been added to items, which comes in 5 tiers. Common, which is the default, uncommon, rare, epic and legendary. With each increasing tier of quality, one of the stats of the item is increased. So for instance with solar panels, the energy production will be boosted. To get these quality items, all we need to do is place quality modules in the building producing them, which will then give the building a chance to boost the quality of the item when it is crafted. For instance, with the copper wire casting, we have 4 tier 2 quality modules installed, which each boost the quality chance by 2% for a total of 8%, meaning that on 8% of the crafts, the building will produce an uncommon copper wire, and on 8% of these 8% crafts, it will produce rare copper wire. Epic and legendary quality are unlocked later, so that's as good as we can get for the moment. We want rare solar panels of course, which we can craft through 2 avenues. Any uncommon ingredients we produce can be crafted into uncommon solar panels, which, with quality modules in the assembler, will have an 8% chance to give us rare solar panels. The other avenue is from the very unlikely rare ingredients the foundries will occasionally spit out, which we can just craft directly into rare solar panels. Due to how low the chances of getting the rare ingredients, I just send them down the belt to be destroyed with the other components, but pluck them off into these assemblers at the last moment. Reliant Robin is coming along well in the meantime. I'm of course going to make use of foundries to more than double the amount of ammo we can get from each iron ore chunk, which requires 1 calcite for every 50 iron ore, so it will import that from Vulcanus whenever it's in orbit. You can see this time that I'm utilising a single sushi belt around the platform, which will greatly simplify the logistics, although it may limit our throughput on important items like ammo or iron plates. I realised I wasn't utilising all the rare iron plates and copper wire that were being spit out, so I quickly set up an assembler for rare green circuits, also picking off the waste belt. With Robin Reliant, I've elected to go with a staggered thruster layout, which makes it much more compact since we can cross-feed fuel and oxidizer through the diagonally correspondent fluid ports. I'm also adding on more solar panels, as I still don't think this is enough to keep the ship running in space around Fulgora. I also plan to put efficiency modules in most of the buildings, especially for the foundries, which account for a massive fraction of the power demand. I even had a go sending up some beacons to put efficiency modules in, so that I could try to squeeze more speed modules into the foundries. When I realised that rare solar panel production was still very slow, I decided to send up the uncommon solar panels I had been accumulating and replace them with rares later once they'd produced. Anyway, so this is my first working prototype of Reliant Robin. It's time to give her a spin and see how she goes. Even with the slightly increased speed, it's clear that our raw damage output is still good enough that as long as these turrets stay loaded, we should make it to our destination safely. On that front, our belts still seem to be well saturated with plates and ammo, and even as we move further out in the system, our power appears to be keeping up. It reaches Nalvis in one piece, but Nalvis isn't the goal, Fulgora is. And with Fulgora being the second furthest out planet in the system, power's going to be a whole nother beast. I have Reliant Robin waiting in Nalvis orbit for the moment the Fulgora destination research finishes, ready to send it out for its test run. Once it sets off, the journey is quite normal to begin with. As we get closer, you can see the asteroid collectors begin to fail as all the machines fight over power. This isn't good. Thankfully it seems that we just about had enough ammo buffered to complete the journey, but going forward I need to add more solar panels and probably more efficiency modules to the foundries. Finally though, we can look down on the surface of Fulgora, seeing only the thick purple clouds blanketing the planet. Again, it seems a manned expedition is in order. But that's going to be next time. Hello and welcome back to Factorio Space Age. After conquering Vulcanus in the last episode, I'm currently aboard Reliant Robin with all the materials I'm going to need to get set up on our next planet, Fulgora. It's not long before we arrive, and I can descend to the surface. Fulgora is definitely the most conceptually interesting planet in the star system. The majority of the planet is covered in an oily desert into which any buildings sink, with only a few rocky outcroppings of solid ground breaking the surface. On some of these islands we can find evidence of an ancient extinct civilization, only the ruins of their abandoned cities remaining. The Fulgoran society seems to have been especially advanced, given that they appear to have consumed all of the resources on the entire planet, with all that remains for us to harvest being the vast piles of scrap which they left behind. More about scrap soon, but first I need to talk about the planet's most forthcoming characteristic, the lightning. It appears that Fulgora's surface is enveloped in a perpetual storm, perhaps a consequence of the ancient Fulgoran society's massive environmental meddling, which means that every night the ground is assaulted by bolts of lightning from above. The only respite from this is lightning rods to attract the lightning, either the ones left behind in the ruins, or those that we can craft ourselves. To unlock the technology which will allow us to process all this scrap into useful materials, I first need to mine a Fulgoran vault ruin, which I eventually find out here on an island to itself. This unlocks scrap recycling, which turns scrap randomly into any of these 12 materials on the screen now. The highlights are of course processing units and LDS, two of the most expensive intermediates in the game, which we're getting for essentially free, as well as holmium ore. Holmium being the special material only available on this planet, used for advanced electronic devices and this planet's science pack. We also unlock the recycler, a new building which can be used to recycle almost any item, giving back 25% of its ingredients, as well as of course automating the scrap recycling process. I chose this island to set up our starter base, as it's quite large and already has good lightning rod coverage from the ruined city. I start out placing some substations and lightning rods around my landing pad, followed up by a lot of accumulators. You see, every time a lightning rod gets struck, all of that captured energy gets discharged into the grid and can be stored in accumulators, meaning that power on Fulgora basically just costs us a lot of space, since we need to defend against lightning strikes anyway. I then start mining my first scrap patch, which we can insert straight into some recyclers. For now I just went for the simplest sorting setup I could think of. Just dump the materials into a belt loop and pull each item off into its own chest using filter inserters. We then want to pull the holmium ore, stone and ice out as if we melt the ice into water, we can then combine them together to get holmium solution. That can then be run through a foundry to turn it into holmium plates. Once we've crafted 50 holmium plates, we unlock the electromagnetic plant. This planet's unique building, which is to electronics what foundries are to metal, with 50% base productivity, although only with a crafting speed of 2 this time. Unfortunately, it needs refined concrete, which I forgot to bring, so I get that hand automated quickly. The electromagnetic plant is quite expensive, wanting 50 steel, 50 blue circuits, 50 refined concrete, and 150 holmium plates. But once we've made it the first time, we can craft any more in an electromagnetic plant, so it benefits from the productivity bonus. Although I don't think it's quite as cool as the foundry, I have to admit, the crafting animation is quite good. Running these has revealed that our power storage is far from sufficient, although thankfully we can actually craft accumulators in them to benefit from the productivity, and we already get batteries from recycling scrap. Although we don't get iron plates for the accumulators directly from scrap, we can recycle the iron gears we do get into plates, so it still works out. A large part of the challenge of this planet is not getting the expensive stuff like blue circuits or LDS, but getting the basics like green circuits. Since we aren't directly producing them, I need a way to decide when to scrap the higher level intermediates into lower ones, which at this point is basically boiled down to a circuit condition which checks if there's greater than 2000 of an item in the logistics network, and if there is, it requests it to this chest to be fed into the recyclers. This ensures that given enough time, all items that it is possible to produce from scrap and scrap derivatives and even scrap derivatives will be produced, and also nothing can back up. It has the downside, however, that it will churn through scrap forever, even if there's nothing using the items it's producing, and, as in any given location, scrap is a finite resource, we'll end up spending a lot of time setting up new mines if we leave it this way. Before I can start producing this planet's science pack, the electromagnetic science pack, I need to get oil. This is easier than it sounds, as remember I spoke about the oily sands covering the planet? It's literally oil. If we place an offshore pump into it, it will pump up heavy oil, which we can easily crack into the light oil we need for science. So if we combine plastic, chromium, copper and light oil, we can make superconductor, the first intermediate. The electromagnetic plants have interestingly distributed fluid parts, though we can place them right next to each other if we mirror the plant. This can be seen better when we craft electrolyte, where we're putting chromium solution in the top, heavy oil in the bottom, and taking the electrolyte out through the middle. It also takes stone, but I appear to have forgotten to input that for the moment. Combining superconductor and electrolyte, as well as chromium plate, green circuits and batteries, we can make supercapacitors, the first ingredient in the electromagnetic science pack. We're actually already producing the other 3 ingredients, being chromium solution, electrolyte and accumulators, so we can start producing the pack right away. Unfortunately, we're in a bit of a chromium drought at the moment, as most of the ore is being turned into plates for electromagnetic plants, so none is left over to be turned into solution for the science pack. I upgrade the belts in the mines and put speed modules in all of the recyclers, but I don't know if it'll boost production enough. Regardless, I start working on getting rockets automated, so we can launch off the science when it does eventually decide to craft. Which starts with crafting electric engines for the silo, because I forgot to send any over when I arrived. They craft very slowly, however, as we currently have a shortage of green circuits of all things, since not enough red circuits are getting scrapped. At this point, it's probably going to be easier to push through with a rocket and redesign later, as we are getting a trickle of electric engines, so I get rocket fuel automated next, which is really easy, since we're getting solid fuel from recycling scrap, and light oil is free from the desert. Whilst I wait for enough electric engines to accumulate, I'm going to go and explore to see if I can find a suitable island to build the real base. As luck would have it, the island down here is pretty big, and I don't know it yet, but this will be the one I end up selecting. Meanwhile, on the home island, it appears that we're producing enough chromium again and some of it is backing up into the chest so it can be used for science. The new production is stressing the power grid though, so I start the process of blanketing this adjacent island in accumulators and lightning rods. The silo does eventually craft, so I get that placed down. Since we get blue circuits and LDS from scrap, and we're already crafting rocket fuel, we can immediately start producing rockets. We're still waiting for the 1000 science packs we need to fill one rocket to craft, so for the moment, it's just more waiting. In the meantime, I start spitballing the new base down on that larger island. All I really know at this point is that I want the scrap handling to be done by belt, and the throughput needs to be a lot higher than it is now. The idea that I land on is to have a tileable module, one for each scrap derivative, which siphons it off the central belt, holds it for storage, and sends it back to the recyclers if we have too much of it. The key advantage this has over the other design is that it knows when to stop. It's not the greatest solution, but basically the modules will stop sending overflow to the recyclers if all of the modules have more than 1000 of their item in storage. Meaning that if we run the system for a long time and everything backs up, we won't end up needlessly chewing through scrap forever. It's not perfect and we still waste a lot of resources, but it's miles better than the old solution. The best part of this is that I've finally found an excuse to use another new feature added in Factorio 2.0, parameterized blueprints. You see, the first module I constructed was set up for blue circuits, but rather than have to go through and change the filters and conditions individually every time I paste it, I can designate the blue circuits as a parameter. This means that when I go to place the blueprint, I'll be prompted to pick a parameter, and when I place the blueprint, every instance of blue circuits in it will be replaced by the parameter we just chose. I use this for red circuits first, and it's pretty easy to just keep doing it. So far, Reliant Robin has just been loping around the system where I've sent it, doing menial tasks, so it's about time I put it to work. I've given it a schedule, first to go to Vulcanus and pick up supplies, then to Fulgora to drop off supplies and collect the electromagnetic science pack, and finally to Nelvis to drop off the science and any Vulcanus buildings it needs. There's still even more waiting for science, so I connect scrap up to the new base and crack on getting some modules connected. It's not long before I have all the items we can get directly from scrap, but there's still some derivatives we can get from scrapping these items to consider. Naturally, while I was pissing around with this, I missed the first rocket launch full of science. Having to wait that long for just a single rocket full of science is ridiculous anyway, so I get started on my new holmium production at the new base, and this time we can actually use belts. This new science build doesn't really look that much bigger, but simply by virtue of being belted and therefore not subject to the inconsistency of robot delivery, it should be far more than enough. We aren't only exporting science packs though, we're also exporting the electromagnetic plant, so we can utilise it on other planets, so I need to get refined concrete automated in the new base. I also need to set rocket fuel back up, and then I can bring the silo over to the new base and start launching my rockets from here. Now that I have my scrap handling fully set up, we're going to be processing through thousands of scrap a minute. So I need something a little bit more substantial than these dinky little patches we've relied on up to this point. I get a rail ramp and some supports and start bridging the gap across the grey oily desert. It's actually harder than I expected to fit the train station, the mines and the power production on the same island, but I ultimately end up with this. This patch has like 23 million scrap in it, which sounds like a lot, but I'm probably going to want more, because I don't know how much longer this run is going to last. These lightning rods I'm using were researched with the electromagnetic science pack. They're bigger, have more range, and absorb more power, so perfect for remote outposts like these. You can see that I've started researching Gleba, the next planet we'll be visiting, as well as loading Reliant Robin, ready for my first journey there. This might seem a bit premature, and it definitely is, but I've learnt my lesson from the last two planets to get it done ahead of time, as to not have to wait around with nothing to do later. Enough rail supports had crafted by this point to go and set up a second outpost. This island has another vault ruin on it, and is even more of a pain in the arse to set a train station up on, as well as having weird spots of scrap around the outsides, which I need to squeeze some miners onto. But it's got a whole 47 million scrap, so I think we can let it off the hook. If you look up in the research window now, you can see we've got something very interesting cooking, but I'm going to save explaining that for when we unlock it, because some things need to be seen to be believed. In the meantime, I've found something to do with all that scrap we've just connected up. Industrial gambling. I get all 3 tiers of quality modules producing, because we are going to need them. I tried to be really smart with quality and recycling here, but it doesn't end up working at all, so I'm going to just pretend this didn't happen. I don't really understand quality all that much, I'm just along for the ride here. My new plan is simply to produce things we want to produce anyway, like this chromium plate, but to put quality modules into the machine. Any normal quality items we just pass off into the usual production lines, and then we keep the uncommon and rare items to use in higher quality crafting chains. I do the same thing with superconductors next. I'm just going to spoil this because I can't be bothered to slyly talk my way around the goal here. These are all ingredients for that mech armour which I'm researching. It's as cool as it sounds, but not to put the cart before the horse. I'll talk about the other ingredients first. Because we aren't producing green circuits conventionally, and I don't want to have to hand over a litany of extra types of item to process if we put quality modules in the recyclers, I need to try something different with them. Basically, I'll take blue circuits from storage and put them into a recycler with quality modules, which will mostly spit out common ingredients, but will occasionally give us uncommon or rare. Any common ingredients we just craft back into blue circuits to be crushed, and any uncommon or rare ingredients we can take away to be crafted into the respective quality of blue circuit. Of course, to craft blue circuits, we need to produce sulfuric acid, which I make in this horrific thing. I just use requester chests to feed the rare and uncommon blue circuit plants, and then realise, oh yeah, why aren't I using EM plants over here? Not only will I get 50% more blue circuits, but it's got an extra slot to fill with a quality module. Once I set up the 4th ingredient for mech armour, supercapacitors, for quality production, I just need to do the most important bit, start gambling for quality Mark II power armour. Funnily enough, I'm really holding out hope for an uncommon power armour, not rare, because I'll get enough materials to craft an uncommon mech armour, and potentially gamble it up to rare, in like an hour or 2, but it'll take me a dozen hours to get enough rare ingredients. Whilst I'm waiting, I do some remote housekeeping on Nalvis, as my original stone patch has dried up, so I need to connect a new one to continue producing purple and military science. After 2 attempts, I still have no quality armour. I guess it really is weighed in the house's favour. However, when it rains, it pours, and on the 6th try, we get a rare Mark II power armour. It sucks because we can't use it yet, but it's good because that's basically a guaranteed rare mech armour in like 10 hours. It's worth noting that in the last episode, I made a mistake talking about the probability of an item jumping multiple tiers of quality in one step. I said that the chance of going from common to rare was the quality chance squared, so if the quality percentage was 8%, then the chance of getting a rare would be 8% of 8%, so 0.64%. In reality, the chance of getting a higher quality is just the quality percentage times 10% for each tier. So to get a rare, it would be 0.8%, and to get epic, if I unlocked it, it would be 0.08%. Anyway, enough ranting. We've got that uncommon power armour we wanted, so I'm just waiting for the last few percentages of the research to finish before I get my cool new armour. Cool new armour is not all that we want. We also want cool high quality equipment to put in it too, starting with quality roboports. I'm making use of the recycler to turn any normal quality roboports back into 25% of the ingredients, and just keeping any uncommon and rare ones. It's not too long before the mech armour researches, but at that moment we don't quite have enough uncommon chromium plates produced to craft it. After a short wait, the last few craft, and it's gambling time again. Unfortunately, the house always wins, so we're stuck with an uncommon suit. Do not fret, however, as it's time we ascend from the flesh, enter our metal sarcophagus, and become one with the machine. You can see that its equipment grid is absolutely massive, but the best bit by far is the jetpack. Any time we're about to collide with an object, we just jump up and fly over it, making it a sort of extremely overpowered version of the Squeak Through mod. It'll even jump you over the top of a train if it's about to hit you, so there's like 90% of my deaths prevented in one fell swoop. Its only weakness is, surprisingly, demolishers. If you cast your mind back to the Vulcanus episode, I said that the smoke and shockwaves that the demolishers release mess with my flying robots. Well, it also gunks up mech armour, making it temporarily unable to fly. Now that I have my mech armour, I'm literally just waiting for my quality equipment to craft, and I'm even shipping in some fission cells from Nalvis to try to roll for quality portable fission reactors. I didn't realise it at this moment, but quality equipment and buildings don't actually consume more power, so this probably wasn't as essential as I thought. This is the grid I ended up with when I left. I know it's ugly, I didn't really care and just wanted to get to Gleber, and you won't see it again, so it's okay. The highlights for me are definitely the plus 246% movement speed and the 112 robot capacity, which you will see me make much use of on Gleber in the next video. That's right, it is unfortunately that time of the video again, where we jet off into orbit, cross interplanetary space, and peer into the darkness of an unexplored alien world, ready to be explored next time. Hello, and welcome back to Factorio Space Age. In this episode, we are going to be visiting the great planet of Gleber, which you can see here we are descending to now. Gleber, which literally translates to soil, is a fungal jungle brimming with life, not all of it friendly. I immediately send down my landing pad and cargo bays from Reliant Robin and place them over here so that I can start sending down all the rest of my starting materials. I wasn't aware of this previously, but having more cargo bays actually increases the throughput as well as the storage size, as each can send or receive their own capsule of items. The first thing the game wants me to do before I can really interact with any of this planet's systems is to go and mine some stromatolites. A stromatolite is just a fancy name for a rock, really, but on Gleber they contain one of two things: copper bacteria or iron bacteria. They aren't much use on their own, if it wasn't for another feature Gleber introduces: spoilage. You might remember this from the fish in the first episode, but most biological items in the game spoil after a set amount of time into another item, and in the case of iron and copper bacteria, that is iron ore and copper ore respectively. Later on we'll be able to breed the bacteria for automated iron and copper, as no patches exist on the surface, but for the moment we can only get it from mining stromatolites. In fact, the only mineral patches on the surface of Gleber are stone patches, one of which I'm mining now so I can craft one of the buildings we unlocked from mining a copper stromatolite. The building in question is the heating tower. The best way I can think to describe it is a sort of burner nuclear reactor, where it takes in flammable material and outputs heat. The most useful aspect of it for our time on Gleber is that it will continue to burn material even when it reaches its maximum heat, which we will utilise to destroy any overflowing biological material without risk of it backing up like a boiler might. As an extra little boon, it also has 250% efficiency, meaning that for every 1 megajoule of material we put into it, it produces 2.5 megajoules of heat. I built this power plant utilising them, which was a waste of time because I never actually end up using it, and end up just putting down some uncommon solar panels for the moment. I brought a lot of materials with me this time to get started, but completely forgot about steel, which is stupid because we need it for agricultural towers, one of the special buildings we unlock on this planet, so I get some hand-fed electric furnaces placed down to smelt it. Whilst that produces, I have a research checkpoint to harvest the jelly nut plant. They're only found in this special purple biome, and despite being highlighted in bright white on the minimap, I struggle a lot to find one. I do eventually find some on the shores of this large lake, and harvesting one gives us 50 jelly nut fruit, which, being organic, will spoil after an hour. This is only the first of the 2 fruits we need to really get into the meat and potatoes of Gleba, so I head down to this green biome in search of Yumiko, the other one we want. I find a quite large patch of the stuff, so I fill my pockets and leave. With these 2 fruits gathered, I unlock this planet's other special building, the Bio Chamber. But before we can craft one, we need a few special ingredients we haven't encountered yet. The first is nutrients, which we can craft from spoilage, which we get either from mining the plants around us, or from when an organic product spoils. And the other is pentapod eggs, which I'm going to need to go out and look for. You see, this planet is inhabited by a few variants of weird 5-legged creatures known as pentapods. You can see the smallest morph of them here, wrigglers, which explode out of these egg rafts when we destroy them. We'll talk about the other morphs when we encounter them, but what's important right now is that when we destroyed those nests, we got pentapod eggs, which I can now craft into biochambers. The pentapod eggs spoil after 15 minutes into live pentapods, so I'll have to keep an eye on them, lest get caught off guard. Okay, so with agricultural towers and biochambers unlocked and crafted, I find an appropriate jelly nut patch and start preparing to do a little farming. It's difficult to find a good area to farm because the plants require a very specific type of soil, which is usually found in the middle of the swamps that make up their respective biomes. So we're fortunate to find a patch right on the border of the purple biome here. The actual farming is quite simple really. We place an agricultural tower near some soil which can support the plant we're farming, provide it with seeds which we get from processing the fruit from the plant, and it automatically plants and harvests the fruit around it. The hard bit is actually processing the fruit, as the biochamber doesn't use electricity, but instead consumes nutrients, functioning almost like a burner building. This is problematic because I made a terrible first choice of plant, since you can make nutrients directly out of processed Yumiko, but not out of processed jelly nut. Before I get too carried away with production, I place down some turrets because every time we harvest fruit, it releases spores, which are basically this planet's version of pollution. Unlike on Nalvis, where the biters really hate pollution, the pentapods here fucking love spores, and will come to check out where we're producing it so I can eat some and just sort of coincidentally destroy anything in their path. I make a sort of poor man's automated jelly nut processing setup, where the jelly we're producing just gets put into a chest, and since it only lasts 5 minutes before spoiling, any spoilage which is produced is made into nutrients to feed the biochamber. The nutrients from spoilage crafting recipe is okay and is good for recovering from deadlocks, but only outputs nutrients with half of their 3-minute spoilage timer left, and is nowhere near as efficient as later recipes. I go out to destroy some egg rafts when the largest morph of pentapod emerges, the Stomper. They're incredibly tanky and try to damage me by, well, stomping on me, although my exoskeletons help in evading it. It ends up taking over 30 seconds of constant fire to take it down, so I'm rethinking leaving just 2 gun turrets by the farms. Safe from attacks for now, however, I can head back and set up this little power plant which will not only provide power but also allow us to burn off any overflow spoilage. I'm mostly just burning off jelly nut for now, as it has a high energy value and I have a lot of it. It's time now for the first of many revisions of my farming setup. For a start, we now have 2 biochambers to process the jelly nut, and any excess fruit is being sent off to the power plant to be burnt off. All the seeds are being sent back off to the agricultural tower, and since we need to consider the possibility that some things might spoil in the biochambers, I have these long inserters extracting spoilage. Jelly production is largely useless without also producing Yumiko mash, So I run some large power poles over to the nearest green biome to set up some production for Yumiko there. Remember those pentapod eggs I had stashed away? This is what happens when they spoil. I'm lucky I was paying attention, or that would have been a long walk back to get my stuff. This green biome wasn't as gracious as the purple one we set up on, and finding suitable soil, which is shown as green on the agriculture tower overlay, in a suitable place was a lot more difficult. Agricultural towers harvest every type of plant, meaning that as soon as I connected it to power, it started harvesting all of the environmental plants around it. But once it's cleared all of those, we can start sorting out our Yumiko processing. It works essentially the same as jelly nut processing. We just place the fruit into a biochamber, which turns it into Yumiko mash and the occasional seed. Where this diverges from jelly nut is that instead of making nutrients out of the spoilage, we can make it straight out of mash, making this a nice little self-sustaining unit. Of course, it's not really self-sustaining until we make a way to void the spoilage it will inevitably produce. You can see I not only have to take spoilage out of the biochambers, but also off the ends of the belts, since the items might spoil en route. Anyway, so now that I have a steady supply of mash, I can bring it over to the jelly nut production to give us a proper source of nutrients. You can see me mine one of the species of explosive plant which inhabit the surface of Glaber to make way for a belt. I start trying to set up production of the next item in the agricultural science pack crafting chain, but first have to deal with an absolute inundation of spoilage from all the items we've let back up. Before I can craft more biochambers to make that new item though, I need to get back on the hunt for more eggs, as all of mine exploded into pentapods. It's here that I find the final morph of pentapods we haven't seen yet, the strafer. Strafers strafe around us in circles, shooting baby pentapods at us like homing missiles. They're not quite as tanky as stompers, but definitely aren't pushovers, so it's not an easy fight. Whilst the new biochambers craft, I head back to the Yumiko farm because its production is dreadfully slow. The problem is the lack of suitable soil I mentioned earlier, but if we combine landfill, some seeds, and some nutrients, I can make artificial Yumiko soil, which can be placed on the swampy parts of the green biome to expand the farmable area. We can also do this for jelly nut, but right now the production is good enough, so I don't bother. Anyway, so finally we can combine jelly and Yumiko mash to make bioflux, an incredibly useful resource which is used in a multitude of recipes. From a better nutrient recipe, to rocket fuel, to bacteria breeding, to finally the agricultural science pack. It has a spoiling time of 2 hours, which is a pretty long time, but most items inherit the spoilage progress of their ingredients, meaning that these bioflux are coming out with only like 40 minutes left in the spoilage timer. You know what I realised at this point? This factory's shit, and there's a few key reasons for that. For a start, we just aren't processing enough fruit, so we won't get much throughput anyway, and for a second, instead of transporting the fruit long distances, which has a spoilage time of like an hour, we're producing the processed fruit, which has a spoilage time of a few minutes, so it's reaching the bioflux chambers already pretty spoiled. So we're going to move the fruit processing on site up to our main factory, and then belt the fruit and seeds back and forth from the agricultural towers. It's not long before I get bioflux and nutrients set back up, and once we've got the spoilage burning set up, we've got a base which is both self-sustaining and hopefully not shit. So, with a bit of jelly we can craft iron bacteria, and if we put that into a biochamber with some bioflux, it breeds into even more bacteria. We can do the same with copper bacteria, and then feed it into some foundries to finally get automated iron and copper, after only like 2 hours on this planet. I'm shipping over the calcite to make molten iron and copper from Vulcanus on Reliant Robin, which may sound like more effort than it's worth, but iron and copper from bacteria is really inconsistent due to how shit my build is. Yeah, I know I said it was good, but it's not. So the more than 2 times boost to yield is more than worth it. I get it working, but there's still an issue with my bacteria breeding. If the iron ore backs up, or it gets starved of bioflux or nutrients, then the volatile bacteria will quickly rot after a minute and the loop dies, as we need living bacteria to make more bacteria. For this reason, there is a recipe to turn jelly or Yumiko mash into a lot of spoilage and a bit of iron or copper bacteria respectively, which means we can cold start the bacteria loop if it dies out. The problem is that I only have room to do the iron or the copper bacteria cold start, so I choose to do the iron one and write this base off too as only another starter base. To make sure I'm only turning jelly into iron bacteria when the loop has died off, I use the ability, added in 2.0, to read the contents of buildings via circuit to check if there's zero iron bacteria in the biochambers, and then only enable the cold start biochamber using the ability also added in 2.0 to turn crafting machines on and off via circuit condition if there's no iron bacteria in those biochambers. I also made the refinement to put the bacteria into a chest after it's been produced, and then only take the ore from its spoiling out of the chest. This lets us buffer up the product and stops the foundries from being blocked by a load of unspoiled bacteria on the belt in front of them. Before we properly write off this base and start a new one, I decide to at least try to get a trickle of agricultural science crafting, even if I can't really use it yet because we don't even have rockets to sell. That starts by breeding pentapod eggs, which are the other ingredient in the science pack, along with bioflux. Obviously this is dangerous business, as if I fuck up timings or the nutrients dry up, those eggs will hatch after 15 minutes and start tearing up the factory. So I place down these turrets, not to defend against an outward threat, but against the inward threat of my own incompetence. The main issue I need to contend with here is how to keep a fresh stock of eggs on the go so none spoil, and also because, as I said earlier, almost anything we produce inherits the spoilage from its ingredients. Thankfully eggs are one of the few exceptions to this rule, so if we breed an egg it gives us back 2 fresh eggs, but the science isn't, so if we have old eggs and it goes into the science, it's going to give us old science. My idea is to just keep a small pool of like 20 eggs in the chest, and then just constantly breed new ones and burn the excess. Since when we add an egg to the chest, it averages out the spoilage between all the eggs in the stack, we should be able to constantly keep the eggs quite fresh this way. As I mentioned, the reason it's so important for the eggs to be fresh, besides stopping them from exploding into slivery fibre-lid pests, is because the agricultural science pack spoils and inherits its spoilage process from its ingredients. Even if we produce an absolutely perfectly fresh pack, it'll only last an hour before rotting, and as it rots it's actually worth less research in a lab, so it's in our best interest to make sure that the packs are as fresh as possible. Once we've connected up the bioflux, agricultural science starts producing, although, it might as well not be. By the time we've set up rocket production, all of the stuff we're crafting right now will have well spoiled, and importing rocket ingredients from another planet is cowardice, greater than no other. Before I get carried away, I do a quick bit of manual scouting to make sure our spore cloud isn't reaching any egg rafts. The real world setting, which stops biters from expanding on Nalvis, also seems to affect the pentapods on this planet, so as long as I stay on top of clearing nests, I shouldn't need to set up defences yet. I'm sure you saw this coming, but it's time to rebuild all over again because the last base was shit. I promise this is the last time. For my fruit processing, I'm largely using the same setup I used last time, just bigger. The differences between this base and the last are not just in size, because I'm making a major change to how the whole thing works. In this new base, absolutely nothing biological will back up. Every belt which carries something that spoils is a constant linear progression of creation, intermittent consumption throughout the journey, and then destruction at the end. The belt will not stop, the belt will not back up, so the product will not spoil. I'll talk more about how I'm going to manage that soon, but first I've got to lay down all of the biochambers which are going to be consuming the resources. For a start, we can combine bioflux, jelly and water in a biochamber to make rocket fuel. Alternatively, if we combine bioflux and spoilage, we get sulfur, Bioflux with Yumiko mash gets us plastic, and by now you're probably thinking, Ryan, haven't you forgotten about the science? Yes, I have forgotten about the science. The entire reason I'm even here. Since it ideally needs to be right at the start of the base, so that it gets the freshest bioflux, I attach it to the left side right next to flux production. I decide on just 2 biochambers, as that comes out to like 90 science a minute, which, even if you count the degradation from spoilage, is still probably more than my Nalvis science's output. Before I went any further, I realised that it's probably best to get fruit flowing through the base now and live debug it as I build it, rather than wait until I've built the whole thing and then play catch up with all my fuck ups. So I get the agricultural towers connected. Then I just need to dump some nutrients into the biochambers and the thing starts up. It's possible to cold start a Gleba base using the spoilage to nutrients crafting recipe, but I went with the much more simple choice to just never stop, especially since plants are literally infinite resources and are the only things we need to sustain the base. As far as how I'm going to keep all of the belts moving non-stop, I start with the nutrient and spoilage belt, recycling all of the nutrients and burning off all of the spoilage that reach the end. Any jelly or mash which reaches the end will also be burnt. As it turns out, the extra throughput from a single tower isn't quite enough, so I build an extra one for each fruit. I also made the strange decision to void the nutrients that get past the science right there and then, when the logical choice probably would have been to just connect it onto the main nutrient loop, so that it at least might get used a bit further down the line. It's safe to say by this point I've completely forgotten science again, but I do at least make a good choice in trying to scrape some energy back from all the shit we're burning in the form of a small power plant attached to the heating towers. I then suddenly remember again that, oh shit yeah, I'm literally here to make agricultural science, and get to work sorting out the egg breeding. I then connect up a heating tower to burn any excess before putting some eggs into the loop, and for the second time this video, I finally start producing agricultural science. The science is no good if I don't have any rockets to launch it in, so I start setting up the iron and copper bacteria cold start recipes. I then build the bacteria breeding chambers and the buffers to store the bacteria while it spoils. I'm about 10 foundries deep when I realise that all of this base is still powered by burning spoilage, which is okay, but not really sustainable considering that each spoilage is a measly 250 kilojoules of energy, so it's time to set up a real power plant. I'm using the heating towers, and if we put that rocket fuel we're producing into the tower, we get a whopping 250 megajoules of energy for each fuel, with a power output of 40 megawatts per tower. They don't benefit from the neighbour bonus like reactors do, but it should be more than enough anyway, considering that the biggest power draw in our main biological production is literally the stack inserters. So really, this power plant is mostly for rocket production. Before I can go any further, my spore cloud is encroaching on the edges of the known world, so I go out there to explore, and explode any egg rafts I find. I also realised I forgot to bring the materials for a rocket silo with me, so instead of setting it up here, I set a request for the ingredients from Vulcanus, and Reliant Robin can deliver it whilst I work. It's then that I learnt my first lesson, not to do other things whilst I have pentapod eggs in my inventory. Whilst the items for the rocket silo arrive, it's back to the mundane things, like setting up sulfuric acid for blue circuits. By my calculations, which I'm not going to double check, the ratios for green to red to blue circuits when using EM plants roughly is 1 to 1 to 1, so I get this little setup together. Once it's all connected up you can see it working, and I double it up on the other side because rockets won't be the only thing we're going to need blue circuits for. I finally get the silo crafted, so I place that down and then get LDS set up. It's not long before our first rocket full of agricultural science is shot up to Reliant Robin, and now is as good a time as ever to talk about my final choice of routing for Reliant Robin whilst I do a bit of exploring. An obvious choice of route would be something like this, where I start at Nalvis and visit each planet in a nice big loop, only visiting each a single time. This is nice and tight and time efficient, but doesn't account for one issue: spoilage. You see, if we pick up 1,000 agricultural science from Gleba, and then go to Fulgara, before finally returning to Nalvis to drop off the science, then the packs will have spoiled by an unnecessary 5 or so minutes, depending on how long the platform stays at Fulgara. For this reason, we'll instead follow a slightly weird sort of P-shaped path, where we first go out to Vulcanus, then go to Fulgara via Nalvis, then go to Gleba, before finally returning to Nalvis to drop off the science. We end up, overall, having to do one extra traversal to complete a loop, but we're delivering the agricultural science as fast as possible, which is the important bit really. The clever sausages among you will probably be asking why we don't just fly all of our science to Gleba and then do all of our research on the surface there, but there's actually a very good reason for why we won't be doing that, which I'll get onto a bit later. Whilst I was out and about, I got an achievement for aggravating a pentapod spawner with my spore cloud, although I really can't see where that would have happened, as all the nests are cleared well outside of my spore cloud, but I got some defences set up around the expensive bits of my base, just in case. I start preparing to produce carbon fibre, my first unlock from agricultural science, which starts by burning spoilage into carbon. I then pre-build the biochambers to craft the carbon fibre itself, which is just made by combining a carbon and 10 Yumiko mash, ready for when the research finishes. Guess what? Pentapod eggs. I'm slightly expanding my carbon production when we get the carbon fibre technology, so I get that started straight up. Then, whilst I was waiting for the next research, I got a cool new weapon imported from Fulgara, the Tesla gun, which does this. There's also a Tesla turret, which would have made defense on this planet ridiculously easy, but I wrongly assumed it needed ammo like the handheld version, when it in fact just runs on electricity. But I didn't realise this until I came up with and executed my other solution. Just kill all of the rafts anywhere near my spore cloud, or anywhere near my spore cloud will ever possibly be. Despite its low damage, the Tesla gun is actually quite effective against strafers and stompers, because it seems to hit every leg individually for full damage. The research for the rocket turret completes next, which is the other use for blue circuits I mentioned earlier, as well as needing that carbon fibre. Another use of carbon is to combine it with sulphur and water to create coal, as none can actually be found on this planet. Combining this coal with more sulphur and water gives us explosives, which I'm turning into shooty rockets. Whilst I wait for a few to craft, I take the moment to just zoom out and admire this hellhole of a planet. Honestly, despite, or maybe even because of, the challenges, this has been one of my favourite planets, so yeah, I'd change my mind, fuck this planet. To satiate my rage whilst I wait for yet more rockets to craft, I play around with that rocket turret I was talking about. Its best quality is definitely the fact it looks like a little dismembered Spidertron for some reason. The major reason that we get this turret on this planet specifically is because it's really good against pentapods. Not that I realised this, I basically just used it on the nests and used my Tesla gun for the stuff that moves. I'm coming to the end of my time here on Gleba. Don't look at the video length. Part of the preparations for which is actually automating biochambers properly, in case I, for whatever reason, feel the need to use them on other planets. Our spore cloud also seems to be reaching a stable size, and with no expansions due to the rail world, and no more production planned, we should be safe without defences permanently. I do take the opportunity to do one more circular sweep, just in case though. After that though, it's about time to leave, so I dump my inventory and hop into the rocket, ready for the journey to the final planet. Next time. Don't look at the video length. I assure you this is the end. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time when we go to Aquilo. Bye. 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 Okay, for those of you that remain, if you reach under your seat now, you will find your NDA. I need you to sign that and return it to me. The truth is, what you have just seen is only scratching the surface of the technology Gleber has gifted us, and to fully utilise it, we will need to first travel back to our home world of Nalvis. I come down from Nalvis orbit, and it's the first time I've stepped foot on my home world in about 30 hours of gameplay. Running around with my augmented movement feels exhilarating, considering the last time I was here, I had tier 1 power armor with like 2 common exoskeletons. I immediately get back onto the conquest against biters, although this time it's not over space or pollution. I close in on this cluster of 3 nests and use the new target prioritization added to turrets in Space Age to make it so that the nests remain unharmed, but the lasers destroy any biters which spawn them. Elsewhere in the system, I'm starting to import bioflux from Gleber to Nalvis using Reliant Robin. Once the bioflux reaches Nalvis, I'm belting it down to those nests. There's definitely something nefarious going on here. With a new Gleber tech called Captivity, I can craft these capture robots, which, if shot at a nest with a rocket launcher, will begin the process of capturing it. This process takes a few seconds, and once the nest is captured, it will no longer spawn biters, but will require a constant influx of bioflux, else they will return to their natural state. Your next question is probably, why? Well, from these captured nests we can extract biter eggs, which have a few uses, but the only one that I care about right now is biolabs. I'll get into what those are soon, but for now, I'll just show you that I've set up a system to keep only fresh eggs and burn any excess. As much like pentapod eggs, if we let them spoil after half an hour, they'll turn into live biters. In anticipation of biolabs, I lay down a new science setup which can support all of the 12 total science packs we're going to have by the end of the game. It's all by bots because I'm lazy and there is even more stuff I need to get to before we can travel to the final planet. Also whilst waiting, I've launched and named the next platform in my fleet, El Camino. Again, we're going to get more into this in a little bit. With biolabs close to finishing researching, I take some eggs from the setup and run back to my base with them. Combining 10 biter eggs, 2 capture bots, a lab, 25 reinforced concrete, and 3 uranium-235, we get ourselves a biolab, which is this horrific biomechanical monstrosity which uses blah 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 scientific shite blah blah from the biter's brains or something to get 2 times as much research from every science pack. In case it's not obvious, that's an insane boost, effectively doubling our SPM, or in other terms, if we research technology that wants 1,000 of each pack, we only actually have to give the biolab 500 of each. It's safe to say I tore down the old labs immediately and fully switched over. That was a nice aside and was incredibly useful in our research going forward, but now it's time to get down to the bread and butter of the B-side of this episode, actually getting to Aquilo. For a start, Aquilo is so far from the local star that the solar-powered ships we've been using so far would run out of power not even a quarter of the way there, so nuclear is definitely the play going forward. It may seem like nuclear is infeasible due to water demand, but one of the less talked about changes in Factorio 2.0 is that every 1 unit of water now turns into 10 units of steam, which in practice means nuclear power plants use 10 times less water than they did before. I wouldn't get used to the look for the ship's reactor, because it gets shifted, lifted and otherwise shrunk many times before the final iteration of the ship. The design of the front is largely something we've seen before, but I'm going to be doing crushing on an entirely new scale to what I've done previously. Not only am I using 4 crushers per asteroid type, but also we have some new asteroid crushing recipes, courtesy of Gleber. Metallic asteroids can now be crushed into iron and copper, carbonic into carbon and sulfur, and oxide into ice and calcite. I use the latter two for reasons I'll explain soon, but I don't really have any need for copper, so for metallic I'll just use the normal recipe. Of course, since we're getting 2 resources from one source, and aren't necessarily using them in the ratio that we're receiving them, I come up with this elaborate system to shoot any overflow off into the vacuum of space. Along with the new asteroid processing recipes, we also unlocked some more efficient fuel and oxidizer recipes, utilising calcite. And the calcite also means we can use foundries on the platform without having to import any from Vulcanus. Similar to how we did on Gleba, I can combine carbon and sulphur to make coal, and then combine the coal with more sulphur to make explosives. You see, when we get further out in the solar system, such as when we're approaching Aquilo, we start to encounter larger asteroids, which require rockets to destroy, which is the reason I bothered automating rocket turrets even though I made no attempt at defence on Gleba. At this moment I only had 2 rocket turrets planned out, which is not nearly enough and I do expand it soon. As it is, the ship is pretty shit, not that I realised it at the time. It's incredibly underdefended, with very few rockets and gun turrets, as well as only having them on the front, and has no ammo buffers to speak of. Regardless, let's see how it fares on a domestic trip, whilst I take it to pick up rocket turrets from Gleba. You can see that I had fed some red ammo out of a hub onto the belt beforehand, because it needs the head start filling up the buffers so that it can start consistently producing its own ammo. Funnily enough, the issue I encounter is with fuel, not ammo. I'm not getting enough water from ice, but to get more ice we need to move so we encounter more asteroids, but to move we need more water to make the fuel. You can see the issue there, and with no fuel we're actually slowly being pulled back into Vulcanus. Thankfully, there is something we can do. In this area of space, we actually get a lot more metallic and carbonic asteroids than oxide ones, but we have these asteroid processing recipes, which take in one type of asteroid chunk and have a small chance of outputting another type. I already have a circuit to yeet any asteroid chunks which we have too many of, so I do the same kind of thing with a slightly lower threshold value to put excess asteroids into the reprocessing machines. This means that, in situations like this where we have way too much of one asteroid chunk and not enough of the other, we will slowly turn the excess into other, more in-demand types. With this little change, you can see that we are soon able to reach Gleba. You can see once the rocket turrets have been placed that I'm using targeting priority to ensure they only target big asteroids, as they're not waste rockets on the smaller ones. I'm also making gun turrets only shoot small and medium asteroids, so they don't waste ammo on the big ones. I tried testing using laser turrets only on small asteroids instead of gun turrets, in an attempt to save even more ammo, which you can see went absolutely swimmingly. Fortunately, she just about limps back into Vulcanus orbit, but from now on we're gun turrets all the way. Soon the Aquilo destination researches, and it's time for us to make the trip. It's not long before we encounter the first big asteroids on our journey, and they're already getting way too close. Despite this, we are already halfway there. You can see that I doubled up the gun turrets before the journey, which is helping massively with damage output on small and medium asteroids. But our trouble is definitely with the big ones, as the rockets are struggling to keep up, even though I doubled those up too. It's not long before a big iceberg slips through and skewers our side, and much like the Titanic, our fate was sealed in this moment. I try to turn around, but we're much too far out now, and it's not long before the big asteroid swoops in to seal our fate. Okay, so let's try something a bit different, starting by walling off the front of the ship. It's a band-aid solution at best, but will help defend us from any stray asteroids slipping through. I'm then going to try an idea that's been bouncing around in my head for a while: speed controls. The idea is that we control how much fuel and oxidizer gets sent into the engines, and by doing this we can travel a bit slower, so I have more time to hit the asteroids as they come in. I create this little circuit system next to the hub which sets a target speed for us to hit. This is the speed that the pumps will turn off if we exceed, and reduces it when we're travelling from or to Aquilo. meaning that when we're in the inner system we can still travel at full pelt, but once we venture beyond that, the speed will be capped to like 100 kilometers a second. Another change I'm going to make is looping the ammo belt around the entire ship. This will not only give us a massive buffer of ammo so that we don't run out during the journey, but also allows me to pepper gun and rocket turrets around the platform so that it will be protected whilst in orbit. I then do some flights testing the speed control system, and it generally works, but the fluctuations between the slowest and fastest speeds are massive, which might be problematic if it ends up going way over target. The problem is essentially that our engines consume 600 units of each fluid per second, but the pumps provide 1200 a second, so we're way oversupplying the engines when the pumps are turned on, which causes the engines to continue to thrust way too much even after we surpass the target speed. To fix this, I create a clock circuit which pulses the pumps on and off for part of the time, essentially reducing their throughput so that it doesn't overfill the engines. You can see that this small change massively reduced the fluctuations. However, I actually had the pumps turned off for more than half the time, meaning that when we wanted to travel at full pelt, the pumps were providing less than the 600 units a second that the engines needed. To fix this, I just change it so that the pumps are turned off for exactly half the time. Whilst I send El Camino on a few more laps of the system to work out any kinks, I have a bit of fun nuking biter nests on Nalvis, since biolabs actually produce quite a lot of pollution, and I don't want the cloud hitting any nests whilst I'm tens of thousands of kilometres away. I'm pretty confident by now that she's ready for the real voyage, so I launch myself up. You can see that there's quite a lot of interesting stuff stored in the cargo bays, the importance of which I'll talk about in the next episode. You might also notice in the schedule that we have a condition when travelling to or from Aquilo to only set off if that tick signal is present. That signal is connected to a combinator which just checks if the ammo buffer is full, so we can't set off without enough ammo for the trip. Once I'm happy, I tell the platform to set off. The trip to Gleba is very quiet, and it's not long until we're crossing into the outer system. You can see that when we crossed onto the Aquilo transfer, the speed automatically dropped to 100 kilometers a second, so at least we know that that's working right. You can also see that I've upgraded all my asteroid collectors to uncommon quality, which gives them an extra arm to grab asteroids, and slightly increases their grabbing range. As we near Aquilo, you can see that the majority of asteroids are now oxide rather than the other two. We're alright for iron and carbon right now, but a higher consumption ship might need a few more oxide asteroid reprocessing machines than the one that we possess. It's not long before we pull gently into Aquilo orbit. Breaking the tradition of the last few episodes, I'll have a little trip down to the planet to finish us off. Look at it. Cold, desolate, dark. It's difficult to see how we'll build a factory here, but I guess you'll have to wait until next time to see how. Hello and welcome back to Factorio Space Age. At the end of the last episode, we landed on the frozen world of Aquilo, and today I'm going to conquer this barren land, or lack thereof, and finally complete the run. Aquilo has few resource deposits and even less land, with most of the surface of the planet covered in a deep ocean of liquid ammonia. We only have access to crude oil, lithium brine, which to my knowledge is unique in it being both a fluid deposit and not being infinite, fluorine, and of course the ocean itself, for both the ammonia and the ice crystals which it contains are vital to most other processes on this planet. I get to work mining the ice formations on the surface, which give us ice platforms and lithium. Lithium is the unique resource this planet introduces, which will be important later. Ice is ice, and ice platforms can be used to expand our buildable area. Since we're building on basically an iceberg, Normal landfill just won't work, so ice platforms are our only method of expansion. Whilst I continue to mine, I get a landing pad placed down and begin to send down all of the stuff I brought with me. You are probably wondering what all the concrete is for. Well, you see, our factory gets way too hot to build right on top of ice, as it would melt it, so we need the concrete to act as an insulating layer. As you can see here, most buildings can't handle the sub-zero temperatures of Aquilo, and so will freeze as soon as we place them down. To counteract this, we need to make sure every building is adjacent to a heat pipe, which we can heat up using a nuclear reactor or heating tower to stave off the biting cold. I brought some solid fuel with us for this purpose, but we burn through it extremely fast, so we might need to find something a bit more energy dense in the long term. Fortunately, I brought with us a nuclear reactor, although it is only meant to be a short-term solution until we can make this factory self-sustaining. Anyway, right now our biggest problem is power. Solar on the surface of Aquilo is only 1% as powerful as it is on Nalvis, meaning each panel would output a measly 60 watts. Watts. Not kilowatts. Watts. Even our rare panels I brought only boost that to 96 watts, meaning it would take like 800 just to fully power a single tier 1 assembly machine. The only positive the devs gave them is that they don't need to be heated, but they're all we have until I can get the first bit of ice melted. Whilst I wait for ice to produce, as the chemical plants are going very slow in separating it out from the ammonia solution I've pumped into them, owing to the low power, I go and connect a single crude oil deposit, as it will be very important in gaining self-sufficiency. I placed down a little power plant in anticipation of the first batch of water crafting, although I quickly realised that the heating tower wasn't going to cut it, and I would lose a lot of my initial solid fuel in the process of heating it, so I swapped over to nuclear. Even once the first batch of water crafts, I still need to wait for the nuclear setup to fight through the cold to 500 degrees, where the heat exchangers can start boiling. You can also see the need to heat buildings causing me issues, as I had to move around this tank to heat that pipe in the middle. Still waiting for that ice to melt, I start planning my fuel production. We can turn crude oil directly into solid fuel by combining it with ammonia, and a combination of solid fuel with water and more ammonia gives us a quite efficient way of getting rocket fuel. Ammonia is the crux of this entire base, as our heating will rely on it, but our ammonia production is limited because we need to get rid of the ice byproduct we get from making it. Conveniently, we can turn ice and ammonia into ice platforms, although it uses more ice than ammonia, so we still are ammonia positive there. It's not quite getting rid of enough ice though, and I'm not sure if we're even making enough ammonia to keep the base heated, so I create an overflow for the ice overflow to just recycle it out of existence if we have way too much. Personally, I don't see why I can't just throw it into the ocean where I got it from. Now that we're heating the base entirely on renewable resources from this planet, it's time to try to move away from relying on imports for our power too. I start building a little power plant, also powered by the rocket fuel we're producing, although it will take a while to heat up, so for the moment I'm keeping the nuclear plant operational. It's small right now, but we don't need a lot of power and there's room to expand. The heating tower provides 40 megawatts of power total, minus a bit as some heat is lost to keep the turbines and pipes forward, which will hopefully last us until we unlock a new, more advanced power source we get on this planet. Down south, I connect up a few more pump jacks to the crude oil patch, which gives me the confidence to tear down the nuclear setup for good. I immediately use the space to make more ammonia production, which gives even further security in the heating and power department. Free from worries about not freezing up my base, I can set sight on what we're actually here for, starting with crafting this planet's unique building. It's called the cryogenic plant, and it deals with crafting recipes requiring low temperatures and extreme precision. Unlike the other planet-specific buildings, it doesn't have a 50% productivity bonus, although it does have a crafting speed of 2 and 8 module slots to make up for it. Above all else, it looks cool as fuck. It takes refined concrete, superconductor, blue circuits and lithium plates. The lithium plate I get from smelting lithium, but the rest I'm importing from Fulgara. You're probably expecting soon that I'm going to pull the rug and explain how we make iron and copper on this planet so that we can be truly self-sustaining, but that time will not come. Unlike other planets, we cannot make most basic resources here and have to rely on imports from the rest of the system. All of this talk of renewable resources and not relying on imports for heating was mostly just to free up space for the metric shit ton of other stuff we'll be importing. Now that we have this planet's unique building, I can start focusing on our big goal here, the cryogenic science pack. I start by connecting up a fluorine deposit, and I also put down a pump jack on some lithium brine, the final resource we weren't mining. If we combine ammonia, lithium brine and chromium plate, we get lithium, which we're immediately just smelting into those little doohickey puck looking plates. Combining fluorine, ammonia, solid fuel and raw lithium gets us hot fluoroketone, which is basically just a sort of coolant. Why we need coolant on a planet like this is beyond me. I mean, like, surely you can just open a window and drop everything down to negative 200 degrees, but before we can use it in anything, it needs to pass through another cryo plant to turn it into cold fluoroketone. All of this new stuff is already stretching my lithium production thin, so I expand the lithium brine mining operation massively. We can then use the fluoroketone in cryogenic science production. We combine a lithium plate, 3 blocks of ice and some cool fluoroketone, and it outputs a single cryogenic science pack, along with half of the fluoroketone we put in, heated up. I'm using bots to feed the science production, which was a terrible idea, as due to the extreme cold, they use 5 times as much power as normal, which results in a lot of bots slowly crawling to roboports to charge. I also seemingly forgot that inserters can just insert directly into rocket silos, and instead put this provider chest like 2 meters away from the silo, just to torture the bots by making them carry it the rest of the way. Sure hope they don't unionize. Besides the rocket fuel, we're importing all of the ingredients to make rockets from Fulgara. Whilst I wait for a rocket launch worth of science to craft, I boost my ice production with some cryo plants doing the ammonia solution separation recipe. One pretty cool benefit the 8 module slots gives us is that we can put 2 tier 2 speed modules into the building and still have enough room for enough efficiency modules to bring it down to minimum consumption for power. Elsewhere on Vulcanus, I realised that I can buffer rocket ingredients and then build like 4 silos, so that for the minority of the time that a platform is in orbit, it can get loaded way faster. Cryogenic science production is super slow, so I doubled it up, although I didn't bother saving the bots any distance in delivering it. It's then that power flatlines. Fuck. Even worse, it's due to a lack of water. Double fuck. I built this little off-grid facility to get some ice melted, but it's going to be incredibly slow. As soon as even a little bit of water comes through, the whole base roars to life, and I speed module the ice plants to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Soon enough, El Camino swings by and picks up our first batch of 1,000 cryoscience, which is going back to Nalvis to research the quantum processor. That's right, the devs snuck in tier 4 circuits right at the end of the game, and I'll talk about how we produce it once it's unlocked. In the meantime, I did end up having to slightly expand the power plant, although hopefully this one will actually be the last time. I'm also doing remote live surgery on my Glebber base, as it nearly flatlines from fruit shortage for reasons I'm not really sure of. It ran perfectly fine for half a dozen hours, but just now is starting to die. In the end, I decided it's better to stop burning fruit and live with the occasional well-spoiled science pack or bioflux, rather than keep it as it is and potentially have the loop die. Because if the nutrient loop kicks the bucket, I'll need to haul my ass over there to go manually kill a nest and restart the pentapod egg loops. Okay, so, quantum processors. We combine blue chips, carbon fibre, superconductor, tungsten carbide and a lithium, along with a bit of cold fluoroketone to cool it, and we get quantum chips, which are needed in two key technologies, railguns and fusion reactors. We're researching them both right now, and fusion is of course that power breakthrough I mentioned earlier, which is going to free us from our shitty rocket fuel power plant. Producing the processors has throat crunched my lithium production, all hinging on a lack of lithium brine, so I head over to tap the last deposits in the patch. I really don't want to wrap my head around the logistics of connecting another one up on this planet, so I'm hoping this just lasts me the rest of the run. Naturally, I forgot to unpause OBS when I unlocked fusion power and railguns, but I just fed the setups with bots anyway, so it's not like you missed much. I did fill the cryo plants crafting them with quality modules, because it's absolutely worth getting high quality variants of these things to make our final goal of making a space platform to escape the system that much easier. My literal first craft of a fusion reactor was an uncommon one, which is incredibly lucky considering how expensive they are. Fusion power is quite simple really. We start off with a reactor which has inputs for cold fluoroketone and outputs for plasma. The plasma outputs connect onto these special turbines which generate power and then output hot fluoroketone. Plasma can't be carried in a pipe, so the turbine has to either be connected directly to the reactor or to another turbine, as each has some carry-through outputs for plasma. As a whole, the system outputs exactly as much hot fluoroketone as it takes in cold fluoroketone, so as long as we pump some into the system to begin with, it can run indefinitely, as long as it's fueled and we have a cryo plant there to cool the coolant. The gains from fusion power are pretty crazy. A fusion power cell takes 1 chromium plate, 5 lithium plate, and 100 ammonia to craft, but contains a whopping 40 gigajoules of energy, which is the equivalent of 5 fission cells, or 10,000 coal. The reactor itself actually takes 10 megawatts of power to operate, but outputs 100 megawatts worth of plasma for a net of 90 megawatts, probably a bit closer to 88 megawatts when you factor in the power demand of the cryo plant to cool it. Each turbine turns 50 megawatts worth of plasma into electricity, meaning we need 2 per reactor. The reactors do benefit from neighbour bonus, like fission reactors do, but I only ever made single reactor setups in this run, so I'm not sure how that works. Just like that, I've got everything I want from this planet, and can just leave. That feels pretty weird to say, considering this was the last planet, but there is still some more we need to do before we can finish the game. You'll probably notice I didn't really talk about railguns. Well, that's because I'd rather just show you. And that was only the handheld one. Want to see me do it again? It's not just an immediate win button, however. Even the railgun can't completely stomp a big demolisher. I'm sure you figured out by now that the run was going to end with one final space platform to rule them all. And, as a lifelong Back to the Future fan, there's only one car I could name it after. There she is. Now let's get this thing put together. Of course, I start with the new stuff, deciding how I'm going to lay out my railgun turrets. They have a narrow firing arc, like a flamethrower, but can be rotated in 8 directions rather than 4. So I place 3 at the front here, to cover a wide arc across the front of the ship. Unlike gun and rocket turrets, we don't need them to cover the side of the ship, because we have no reason to stop somewhere which has the huge asteroids they're here to destroy. I then start with my usual layout of gun turrets and asteroid collectors. This time we have rare collectors, so they have 3 arms and a quite large collection area. I removed the railgun blueprints before I connected the platform to be constructed, because I don't want my most expensive parts getting destroyed by stray asteroids before defences are set up. And before you ask, no, I can't put walls in front of them, because they will destroy anything, friendly or otherwise, between them and whatever they're trying to shoot. Of course, a big new ship needs a big new asteroid processing setup, and not only are we splurging on 6 crushers per asteroid type, but I've also graduated to using the advanced metallic processing, so we have access to copper on the platform. I'm also going big on asteroid reprocessing because the dominant asteroid type changes often en route to the solar system edge and beyond. I use a circuit condition to change the reprocessing recipe dynamically depending on what's present on the belts, since the ratio of how many of each recipe we want will, again, change as we travel, and I don't want to have to fiddle around with it manually. Next up is the fusion reactor, which, being very expensive and important, I'm putting right at the front because the worms in my brain told me to do so. I naturally cracked out the uncommon quality ones we crafted to give the DeLorean sufficient power. Looking back, I really should have made like 10-ish times more power to get to the 1.21 gigawatts mark. Down on Aquilo, I need to barrel up some hot fluoroketone to send to the DeLorean to start the fusion reactor loop. Whilst I wait for the fluoroketone to make its way over to Vulcanus, in whose orbit I'm constructing DeLorean, I get to work making something to use all of that asteroid processing we set up. For a start, we're going to need a decent amount of railgun ammo, which is what the copper was for. It takes 5 steel, 2 explosives and 10 copper wire to make 1 railgun shell, and we are going to need a lot of railgun shells. I don't really know what the point of the explosives are. I assumed the chunk of steel travelling at Mach fuck would do enough damage, but they don't pay me to ask questions. Rocket and bullet production naturally go right up next to it, and we will yet again have a massive ammo buffer to ensure that we stay protected over the long journey. We can actually make the explosives in a cryo plant to make use of the faster crafting speed and more module slots. Our metal production this time must be immense, although I do try to fit it in a smaller space as possible. Fuel production is similarly large, and the less that is said about that Gordian knot of resource separation belts, the better. Before you know it, the engines are laid out and connected up, and she's nearly ready for a maiden voyage. By now, the fluoroketone and fusion cells have arrived from Aquilo, and I set course for Gleba and let her go. Of course, I wasn't expecting any issues here, and this flight was more to fill the buffers than anything else, as well as getting us into position for an Aquilo transfer. So, Aquilo transfer we do. This is the first real test of the ship's durability. If it makes the trip intact, it's ready for a try for the edge of the solar system, but if it takes any damage, it's clearly not suitable, so we need to go back to the drawing board. Thankfully it passes with flying colours, and I'm picking up some higher quality railguns from the surface, as we want every advantage we can get. Quality on turrets only affects their range, but out in space that means we can maintain a larger distance between the platform and incoming asteroids, which is invaluable. Okay, so it's time to make the final journey to the edge of the star system. Except, I forgot to research it. Awkward. It's locked behind this research called Prometheum Science Pack, which is analogous to space science from vanilla. It's more of a post-game thing, and I'm not going to explore it in this video because it unlocks only one very powerful but super fucking boring research. Soon enough the funny juice researches, and I can finally set my destination to the edge. It's a whole 100,000 kilometers away, so about 7 times the distance from Nalvis to Vulcanus, meaning that this will be quite a long journey. I'm waiting around looking for the huge asteroids which are present this far out, when a huge carbonic asteroid drifts in. It's way too far to one side to be in range of the railguns, but soon enough a second one shows up. It's not our only problem though, as if you look at the platform, some of our turrets have run out of ammo. It turns out that when I was trimming excess bits off the platform, I had accidentally severed a pair of undergrounds in the ammo buffer. I was too late in fixing it to save the bow from a glancing blow, but fortunately we have a temporary relief from the barrage of asteroids, well enough for the ammo to reach the turrets. I also end up slightly reducing the target speed of the platform, since we're already using more ammo than we craft. Through all of that chaos, we didn't really get an opportunity to watch the railguns in action, so we can watch now as they one-hit these huge asteroids from afar. As I mentioned earlier, they destroy everything between the end of the barrel and the thing they're shooting at, which is beneficial when there are big clouds of asteroids ahead of the huge ones. Regardless, it's not long before I'm approaching the solar system edge, and almost as if in one last push to keep us here, a massive wave of asteroids glide in. Of course, we easily destroy them and reach the threshold. A tight 58 hours after we first touched down on Nalvis, we've escaped into the blackness of interstellar space to float an unknown distance back to our homeworld. My save is available to view on the Galaxy of Fame, the link to which I'll put in the description. Although this is the end, we aren't done, as one more destination awaits us. The shattered planet exists 4 million kilometres beyond the solar system edge, and the route to it is even more perilous than the one we just completed, but it holds the secrets of Promethium. You can see here when I start the journey that we slowly start to see the elusive red Promethium asteroid mixed in with the rest. Promethium has one use, the Promethium Science Pack, which itself is only used for a single technology, research productivity. That's exactly as overpowered as it sounds, giving you 10% more research per science pack for every level you research. I also really don't care about it and want to move on to other runs, so we aren't going to look at it. Sorry? As you watch me venture further out towards the shattered planet, I want to talk a bit about what I thought of Space Age. For a start, it was absolutely worth the wait, and more than worth the money. The experience of playing what is essentially a big overhaul mod, but with Woob's meticulous standards, was nothing short of incredible. And from the graphics to the sound design to the unique concepts of every planet, they absolutely knocked it out of the park. As a chronic music listener, I thought the soundtrack was great, even if I only get to listen to it when I'm editing it into the background of the video due to how I record. Gleber's The Harvest was a standout to me. It sort of weirdly transitions from almost like a Minecraft song to a cinematic epic, which really caught me off guard whilst I was putting together the last video. If I had to rank the new planets added, I would say my least favourite was Aquilo. After all the other planets, it just sort of felt like a formality, especially since the production chains unique to it were very simple, and most of the resources had to be imported from off-world. I thought the heat pipe mechanics were cool, at least, forcing me to build in a new way, but it wasn't enough to offset the generally boring planet. Next from the bottom is Fulgora. I'll start with the good. I think that the scrap recycling is quite cool, and makes for an interesting challenge which you can approach from dozens of different angles. It's also nice for once to not have to worry about mass producing blue circuits and LDS. Whether this is also this planet's downfall, because getting basic materials can often be frustrating, and the limited space on the islands and shitty lightning power makes it an interesting, but ultimately quite annoying and not very satisfying experience. In second place is Vulcanus. It's relatively simple compared to the other planets, but the concept of a fiery forge world inhabited by dune worm fire slug things is absolutely fucking exquisite. Metallurgy is satisfying and fun to play around with, and has massive implications on the other planets going forward. Probably my only complaint is that the science pack was a bit too easy to make, but even that's scraping the bottom of the barrel. That, of course, leaves in first place Gleber. Gleb. The Glebster. Gleb Glebington. Coming into Factorio Space Age, I was ready to dive onto the Gleber hate train, but from the moment I stepped foot on its gooey, oozing surface, I knew I was in for a treat. Farming is the most unique way of gathering resources in the entire game, and preventing and controlling spoilage is an incredibly engaging logistical challenge. I would say the spoilage mechanic is the closest baseline Factorio has gotten to an overhaul mod like UltraCube, where you are being forced not just to consider what's going where, but also how fast it's getting there, and whether you are correctly utilising the unique aspects of that item. For instance, having to position your science physically close to where the ingredients are produced to reduce spoilage time, or transporting fruit rather than mash or jelly so that the item with the longest spoilage timer is the one that's moved long distances. Probably my only problem with Gleba was the enemies, but honestly, it's more of a problem with the game as a whole. The combat in Factorio is, not to mince words, fucking terrible, and acts mostly as a production challenge, which is fitting but not really satisfying. The only combat experience which felt even mildly interesting was fighting the demolishers on Vulcanus, but even that was just a bit above the baseline suffering which combat in this game evokes. From what I heard in Doshington's review of Space Age, he spoke to a dev who said that there was originally going to be these floating jellyfish things on Aquilo which would, quote, mess with your buildings like an Enderman from Minecraft, and I think that if you had to do something with power switches and circuits to counter them, then that would be very fitting with the non-combat bits of Factorio, but alas, they didn't make the final cut. Overall, I think that the DLC itself is great. Even if there are bits and pieces I don't like, I found the overall experience very enjoyable. What I'm most looking forward to is what mod makers managed to do with the new engine features added with Space Age. Oh, and one more quick thing before the video ends. I think the quality names are great, despite of what people say. I do see a lot of people say it doesn't really fit the aesthetic of this game, but it was already corny as fuck, so I think they fit right in. Anyway, thank you for watching and for listening to me ramble. It's been a pleasure making this series after waiting 2 years to get my hands on Space Age, and I look forward to whatever I decide to do next. A special thanks to my Ko-Fi supporters for helping me do what I do, the names are on screen now, and I hope to see you next time.